Have you ever thought about how some people seem more at peace as they get older, while others feel stuck or even drained by the relationships they're in? Sometimes having a partner later in life isn't a source of joy. It can become a quiet burden, stealing your freedom, exhausting your emotional energy, and slowly taking away the simple things that make life feel like your own. We grow up hearing that love is everything, finding a partner is the goal, that growing old alone is something to fear. But let's be honest, for many people, especially after 60, being single can be the start of something free. This video isn't about saying love is bad. It's about asking a different question. What if your peace matters more? You've spent years taking care of others, working, raising families, making sacrifices. Now, maybe it's time to ask what you want. What brings you joy? What makes you feel alive? We're going to talk about real stories, honest truths, and the parts of aging that no one talks about. So if you've ever wondered whether being on your own might actually feel better, stay with me, you might just be surprised. Let's be real. Society makes it look like growing old with someone is a dream, but for a lot of people, that dream comes with a price. Late life relationships can be exhausting. You're still managing feelings, still compromising, still putting yourself last. And sometimes you stay because it's what you've always done, not because it brings you joy. This video isn't here to tell you what to choose. It's here to permit you to choose you. The first, the emotional burden of constant compromise. Let's talk about something no one warns you about when it comes to long-term relationships: the emotional weight of always giving in. Lucas is 74 years old. He spent nearly 50 years being what people call a good husband. He let his wife choose the movie. He skipped his morning routine because she liked a different rhythm. He got used to eating what she liked even when he didn't. Loud TV in the morning, that was her thing. Lucas just wanted some peace with his coffee. At first, it didn't bother him. These things felt small, harmless, but over time, they added up. One day he realized he no longer had a morning that felt like his own. It wasn't about the TV or the breakfast. It was about losing touch with what he wanted. That's how compromise works. It doesn't storm in and take over. It creeps in, one polite decision at a time, until you forget what it felt like to choose freely. Isabella, age 68, went through something similar after her husband passed and she started dating again. Her new partner was kind, sweet, but over time she found herself cooking meals she didn't love, skipping her afternoon walks, giving up her Sunday silence because he liked the news on loud. None of it was terrible, it was just draining. She said, "I realized I wasn't excited to see him. I was bracing myself." Emotional burden doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels like fatigue, like a heaviness you can't explain. When you're younger, you make these adjustments with energy, you learn to grow together. But when you're older, your emotional bandwidth is smaller. You want peace, not negotiation. You want quiet, not constant compromise. The problem is that people stay in these patterns because they're familiar. They tell themselves it's just part of love. But love should never ask you to disappear. If your days are filled with subtle tension, if your thoughts are always filtered through what someone else will think or feel, if you're constantly trading your comfort for theirs, you might be carrying an invisible weight. And here's the thing: it's okay to put that weight down. Choosing peace in your later years isn't quitting, it's healing. You've earned the right to want mornings that are yours, nights that feel restful, days where you don't have to check in before making a decision. You're not selfish for wanting space. You're not wrong for needing quiet. Maybe it's time to ask, are you staying because it feels good or because it feels familiar? Because at this stage in life, you deserve better than familiarity. You deserve freedom. And sometimes that freedom starts with simply saying, "This doesn't feel like me anymore." It's not an easy thing to admit, but it's the first step to getting your life and your peace back. Let me tell you something important here. Compromise is not a dirty word. Healthy compromise is part of any loving relationship. But there's a difference between compromise and self-erasure. One is mutual, the other is silent surrender. And the trouble is, we often don't know we've crossed that line until years have passed. People like Lucas and Isabella don't regret loving their partners. What they regret is not speaking up, not preserving little pieces of their joy, not realizing how much energy they were spending just to keep things smooth. And in later life, that energy becomes more precious than ever. Your energy is your lifeline. Your time is sacred. You should be spending it on things that bring you peace, not on constantly adjusting to someone else's rhythm. That could mean saying no more often. It might mean choosing solitude over settling. It might even mean leaving a relationship that looks fine on the outside but feels heavy on the inside. And let's be clear, there's nothing wrong with loving someone and still choosing yourself. That's not betrayal. That's true. Sometimes stepping away from a dynamic that drains you is the kindest thing you can do for both of you. I once heard someone say, "When I turned 70, I stopped apologizing for needing space." That stuck with me. At some point, we all need to ask, when do we stop adjusting and start honoring who we are? So if you're in a relationship that feels like work every single day, this is your permission to pause, to breathe, to ask the questions you've been avoiding. And if those questions lead you to peace, then they're worth asking. The second, the myth of companionship. From the time we're young, we're told that love is the goal. Finding someone to grow old with is what success looks like. You see it in the movies, in the stories we hear, in the pressure from family and friends. When are you going to settle down? You're too great to be alone. These phrases get embedded in us like they're the truth. But here's what most people don't say out loud. Not everyone wants to grow old with someone. And even if you once did, that doesn't mean you still have to. Mia, who is 70 and lives in Oregon, gets asked all the time why she never remarried. Her answer is always the same: because I like my mornings quiet, and I don't miss sharing a bathroom. That answer usually gets a laugh, but it's real, it's honest, and it makes people think. Because here's the thing, being alone doesn't mean you're lonely. In fact, for a lot of people, being alone is when they finally feel like themselves again. There's a myth out there that companionship automatically equals happiness, that if you're with someone, you must be fulfilled. But how many people do you know who are in relationships and feel unseen, unheard, unhappy? There's a difference between being alone and being disconnected. Being in a relationship doesn't protect you from feeling isolated, and being single doesn't mean you're missing out. It's time we challenged this idea that partnership is the ultimate goal. For some people, it's a beautiful journey. For others, peace comes in solitude. The problem is that we often assume one is better than the other. But life isn't one size fits all. Some people thrive in relationships, others thrive on their independence. What matters is that you choose what feels right to you, not what looks right to others. And let's not forget, there are different kinds of companionship: friendships, pets, community, nature. There are so many ways to feel connected that don't require a romantic partner. So if you've ever felt like something was wrong with you because you're single, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, is this my belief or is this someone else's expectation? Because the freedom to live how you want is one of the greatest gifts of aging, and you don't need a partner to claim it. You just need the courage to say, this is enough, I am enough, and maybe, just maybe, that's where the real joy begins. Let me share another story. Henry, a widower in his late 60s, found himself constantly pushed by his kids to get back out there. They meant well, but every time he went on a date, he came home more exhausted than excited. One day he told his daughter, "You know what I miss? Reading a book without feeling like I need to entertain someone." That hit home, because no one ever tells you that being alone can actually be restorative. We live in a culture that's obsessed with coupling, but rarely do we stop to ask, what does happiness look like at this stage of life? For some, it's quiet evenings, it's coffee on the porch without conversation, it's traveling without waiting for someone else to say yes. And maybe that's the takeaway here. Your later years aren't about meeting expectations, they're about living honestly. The third, the loss of true independence. Freedom is one of the most beautiful gifts that comes with aging. You no longer have to answer to a boss, raise kids, or keep up appearances. You've paid your dues, you've earned your time. But ironically, just when that freedom arrives, many people give it away without even realizing it. Let's take Noah. He is 78 and spent most of his adult life being a devoted husband. He was proud of that. He built a life, raised kids, and stayed loyal. When his wife passed, the grief hit hard, but what caught him off guard was what came after. For the first time in decades, he could make decisions just for himself. He could go for a walk without telling anyone, eat cereal for dinner, watch old westerns without negotiation. And you know what he said? I didn't know how much I missed myself. That's what independence is, not just physical space, but mental freedom, the space to think your thoughts without adjusting for someone else, the freedom to decide without having to explain it. That is a kind of liberation you cannot fully understand until you've been without it. Charlotte, 72, had always wanted to travel through Europe, but her husband hated flying. He would always say, "One day." That day never came. After he passed, she booked a solo trip to Italy. It terrified her, but she went. She stood in front of the Colosseum and cried, not because she was sad, but because she finally did something for herself. She said, "I felt like I was meeting myself for the first time in 40 years. Relationships are beautiful, yes, but they are built on compromise, and when that compromise lasts for decades, it becomes automatic. You stop asking what you want. You just respond to what your partner needs. It's not intentional, it's just how we survive in shared space." But after 60, the question becomes, what do you want now? Not what worked when you were 30, not what made your partner happy. What do you, in this chapter of life, need to feel alive? Some people realize they've never lived alone, never managed their schedule, never gone to a movie by themselves, and when they do, it's not scary. It's freeing. That freedom does not mean you dislike people. It does not mean you are broken. It means you are finally in a place where you can choose how you want to live. So if you're single now and wondering if something's missing, maybe the answer is that nothing is missing. Maybe what you're feeling is space, and maybe that space is exactly where your next chapter begins. Let's go even deeper. When you've spent years sharing a life with someone, you develop routines built around that partnership. Dinner at a certain time, TV shows you both watch, holidays were spent with their side of the family. It all becomes second nature. But when you suddenly have space, you realize how many of those routines were never really yours. That realization can feel disorienting at first, like stepping into a quiet house and hearing your own footsteps for the first time, but that quiet, that's the sound of freedom. And here's something we don't say enough: you are allowed to change. Just because you built one kind of life before does not mean you're required to keep living that way forever. Many older adults discover new interests, new friendships, and even new versions of themselves once they're alone. They start painting again. They move to a new city. They finally adopt that dog they always wanted. They begin to remember what joy feels like when it isn't shared or compromised, just lived. Noah eventually joined a photography club. Charlotte started teaching Italian cooking classes at the local community center. Neither of them planned to reinvent themselves, but in rediscovering their independence, they found more than freedom, they found purpose. And that's what this is really about. Not just space, not just peace, but purpose. The chance to reconnect with what matters to you, no explanation needed. So if you're at a place in life where you feel like something is shifting, pay attention. That shift might be you coming back to yourself. You're not late. You're right on time. The fourth, emotional exhaustion from compromise. Some people think the danger in relationships is fighting, but honestly, it is the silence that wears you down. Not the peaceful kind, the empty kind. Compromise starts small. You skip your morning walk because your partner wants to sleep in. You watch a movie you are not interested in. You adjust dinner plans. At first, these feel like small acts of kindness, but over time they become habits that erase you. Then one day, you realize you are not asking for what you want anymore, not because you are content, but because it is easier to stay quiet. You start to lose your voice in your own life. That is emotional exhaustion. It is not loud or dramatic. It builds slowly, like a fog rolling in until you cannot see anymore. Noah, who we mentioned earlier, found this out the hard way. After his wife passed, he expected grief. He got that, but he also got clarity. He realized he had spent years constantly adjusting. Not big things, little ones, but they added up. He told a friend, "I did not know how tired I was until I finally stopped apologizing for wanting silence." And that is the thing. Emotional compromise in your later years feels heavier. You do not have the same bandwidth. You crave peace, stillness, simplicity. But relationships, even loving ones, require negotiation, constant checking in, shared schedules, mutual sacrifice. And while those are part of love, they also take energy. The energy becomes more precious with age. Susan, 67, had been married for over 30 years. She loved her husband deeply, but she admitted that every night felt like a small performance. She would laugh at jokes she did not find funny, cook meals she did not enjoy, and all because it kept the peace. After he passed, she started painting again, not for anyone else, just for her, and she realized how much she had missed herself. Peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of freedom. The freedom to be fully you, without filtering, without managing someone else's emotional landscape every hour of the day. That is not selfish, that is survival. So if you find yourself feeling drained in a relationship, ask yourself, when was the last time you felt energized by your own life? Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is give yourself back to yourself. Another woman, Evelyn, shared something that stuck with me. She said, "I stopped choosing. I just let life happen around me." For years, she let her partner take the lead. It was easier. But deep down, she felt invisible, not because he was unkind, but because she had stopped showing up for herself. When Evelyn moved into her own space after a divorce, she started small. She picked out a new bedspread, rearranged her kitchen, took morning walks again. Each choice, no matter how small, felt like a reclaiming, a reminder that her needs mattered too. This is what emotional exhaustion steals from us. Not just energy, but identity. And it does not announce itself, it just shows up one day when you feel like a guest in your own life. You deserve to feel at home in your life again. Maybe that starts with a pause, a deep breath, and one question: what do I want, just for me? The fifth, the hidden toll of caregiving. When people think about growing old with someone, they picture the sweet parts, holding hands on the porch, sharing meals, laughing about old stories, and sure, those moments can be beautiful. But what we rarely talk about is what happens when one partner becomes sick and the other becomes their full-time caregiver. Benjamin, 77, had been married for over 50 years. He loved his wife deeply. When she was diagnosed with a degenerative illness, he didn't hesitate to care for her. He cooked, cleaned, and scheduled doctor appointments. He slept in a chair next to her hospital bed for weeks. Everyone called him a hero. He was. But he was also exhausted. He told a friend, "I barely had time to shower, let alone think." And that kind of emotional and physical toll wears on you, slowly. Caregiving is an act of love, but it is also a job, a heavy one, and when you are in your 60s or 70s, that weight feels even heavier. No one tells you how lonely it is. You are with someone all the time, yet you feel invisible. Your needs fall to the bottom of the list. You begin to disappear. Susan went through something similar. She cared for her husband through his final years. After he passed, she felt guilty for feeling relieved, but that relief was not about losing him. It was about regaining herself. For the first time in years, she could breathe, she could sleep, she could cry without being strong for someone else. These stories are not uncommon, and yet they are rarely spoken aloud. Why? Because society praises the sacrifice but ignores the cost. And this is important. Deciding not to enter or stay in a relationship because you fear becoming a caregiver does not make you cold. It makes you aware. Your later years should be about restoring your own well-being, about protecting the energy you have left, about choosing peace, especially when the world around you is telling you to keep sacrificing. Yes, caregiving can be a noble role, but it should not be expected, and it should never come at the cost of your health. So if you're single and someone asks, "Don't you want someone to grow old with?" you have every right to say, "I want to grow old with myself, in peace." Because love is not only about staying. Sometimes love means letting go before it breaks you. There's also the financial side that people rarely discuss. Doctor visits, prescriptions, medical equipment, sometimes even modifying the home. And if the caregiver has health issues of their own, which many do, it becomes a compounded strain. The weight is not just emotional, it is economic. Then there's the mental toll. Caregivers often experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and even physical illness, and yet they rarely seek help because they feel they can't. Who will step in? Who will understand? That's why more and more older adults are making a different choice. They are choosing to live solo, not out of fear but out of intention. They are choosing to prioritize their own vitality and well-being, something they have every right to do. So if you are listening to this and feeling the guilt rise, breathe. You are not selfish for wanting to protect your peace. You are wise to see your limits. The sixth, financial and emotional strain. We don't talk enough about money and love, especially in later life, and maybe that's because it feels uncomfortable. But the truth is, financial stress is one of the top reasons relationships break down, even when the people involved genuinely care about each other. Ella, 66, thought she was stepping into a peaceful chapter when she met Martin, a retired teacher with a warm smile and a love for poetry. They moved in together after 6 months. Things felt easy, until the bills started stacking up. Martin had debt. Ella didn't know how bad it was: credit cards, medical expenses, and some overdue taxes. At first she thought it was manageable. But then came the requests: a new car repair, help with a loan, money to support his adult son who had lost his job. Suddenly, Ella's retirement savings were no longer just hers. She felt like she had to choose between helping him and protecting herself. The worst part? She felt guilty either way. This story isn't rare. Many older adults, especially women, enter relationships where financial boundaries aren't clear. And it isn't always about big spending, sometimes it's the small things. One person contributes less to groceries, someone forgets to split the utility bill, a pattern begins, and before long, resentment grows. And here's where it gets tricky. Talking about money feels personal, uncomfortable. You might worry it sounds selfish, but here's the truth. It's not selfish to want to feel secure, especially after a lifetime of working, saving, and sacrificing. Financial stress bleeds into other areas. It affects how you sleep, how you plan, how you connect with the people you love. And when you're older, you don't have decades to recover from big mistakes. Karen, 69, shared her story in a retirement forum. She had lived alone for over 10 years and loved the freedom. She paid her bills, traveled when she wanted, and finally started her art studio. Then she fell in love. A man named Bill, kind-hearted but financially unstable. Karen lent him money, at first just small amounts, then more. Eventually, she had to sell her car to cover a joint debt he left behind. That relationship ended, and so did her dream of expanding her studio. The emotional toll, just as real. The shame, the regret, the heartbreak of realizing that love came with a price she never meant to pay. That's why many seniors choose independence, not because they don't believe in love, but because they believe in peace, in stability, in not having to explain their spending or justify their priorities. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to enjoy the money you worked hard for. So before you commit to someone new, ask the hard questions, set the clear boundaries, talk about expectations, and most importantly, trust your gut. Because love without peace is not love. It's pressure. And you have lived too much life to carry that kind of weight again. There's also something important about emotional strain that doesn't always look financial on the surface, but it's deeply tied to money. It is the feeling of losing control. When your resources are linked to another person, even simple choices like buying a gift for your grandchild or taking a spontaneous trip can feel like you need permission. And that slowly chips away at your sense of autonomy. Over time, you might stop doing what makes you happy just to avoid an argument. You start second-guessing yourself, and that's not love. That's walking on eggshells. The older we get, the more we should be allowed to live without unnecessary stress. You've earned that, you've built that, and no relationship, no matter how promising it seems, should take it away. So if you're choosing to stay single, you're not closing yourself off. You're staying open to a life that truly supports your values, your peace, and your future. The seventh, reclaiming identity and facing stigma. There is a quiet kind of pressure that surrounds people who are single later in life. It is not always loud or direct. Sometimes it is just a glance at the dinner table, a question at a family gathering, or a look of pity when someone finds out you live alone. Society has created this idea that being coupled is the ultimate destination, and if you have not arrived there, something must be missing. But what if nothing is missing? What if you are simply choosing a different kind of life, one that fits you better now? Lily, a 71-year-old woman from Florida, started a blog called Solo and Thriving. At first, it was just a place to reflect, but soon it grew into a space where thousands of people gathered. Widows, divorcees, and lifelong singles. They were not looking for someone to complete them, they were reconnecting with themselves. Lily often writes about the simple joys she had forgotten, drinking coffee while watching the sunrise, spending an entire day painting, or traveling without a schedule. She said, "I had no idea how much of my life was spent adapting to other people's needs. I thought that was love, but maybe love includes space to be yourself too." That statement resonates deeply because we are taught early on to blend, to become part of a couple, to compromise, adjust, and sometimes shrink. And if we do that long enough, we forget who we were before the we. But being single later in life gives you a rare chance to reintroduce yourself to yourself. You can try new things, create new routines, rebuild dreams that were put on hold, and most importantly, you get to do it on your terms. People might still ask, "Why are you alone?" Let them. You do not owe them an answer. Because if you are living in alignment with your values, your passions, and your peace, then you are not alone. You are free. And freedom, especially in your later years, is not something to be explained. It is something to be lived. So here is your reminder. You do not need a partner to have a full life. You need purpose, joy, and the courage to be fully yourself again. Another woman, Janice 74, shared that she used to feel embarrassed going to restaurants alone. She would always order takeout just to avoid the looks. But one day she made a different choice. She dressed up, walked into her favorite Italian place, and sat down alone with a book. She said it was the best meal she had in years, not because of the food, but because she finally stopped waiting for someone else to validate her presence. That is what reclaiming identity looks like. Small moments, quiet bravery, choosing yourself even when the world doesn't quite understand. Over time, the stigma fades, not because people stop judging, but because you stop caring, and that is when you start to feel free. So if you are standing at the edge of change, unsure whether to step forward, let this be your sign. It is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Here's the moment where everything shifts. What if being single after 60 is not something to fix, but something to celebrate? Think about it. You've spent a lifetime showing up for others. Now, you get to show up for you. No more waiting, no more adjusting, just you, living in rhythm with your desires. Do you want to eat breakfast at noon? Do it. Do you want to spend the weekend reading in silence? That's yours. Do you want to travel across the country without asking anyone's permission? Go for it. Because choosing yourself is not selfish, it's sacred. You're not giving up on love. You're giving up on the version of love that always asked you to come second. That shift from sacrifice to self-honoring is where freedom begins. This is not the end of something, it's the start of something more honest, more peaceful, and more you. This chapter of your life is not a leftover, it is a fresh start, and the pen is in your hands now. You have spent years supporting others, showing up for your family, your friends, and your community. Now, it is time to show up for yourself. Maybe that looks like a new hobby. Maybe it is taking quiet walks without a destination, or reading books just because they make you feel good. If you find companionship that adds peace to your life, welcome it, but never believe you need it to be whole. Being alone does not mean something is missing. It can mean nothing is wasted. Your time, your energy, your spirit, they matter. So honor them. You are not running out of time. You are standing in the moment where everything begins, with your voice, your freedom, and your truth. If this message resonates with you, let us know in the comments. What part of today's story spoke to your heart? Maybe you saw yourself in one of the examples. Maybe it gave you the clarity you have been needing. Either way, your voice matters. Share this video with someone who might need it, a friend, a parent, a neighbor. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a conversation that could change your life. Thank you for being here. This is only the beginning.